Well, ever since I went to college, I've made it my business to choose my teachers. I figured I could learn just about any subject matter that I wanted to through listening, looking, reading, and through contact with teachers. But I've always loved masterful teachers. So when I was in college, though I was majoring in philosophy and mathematics, I chose to study fine arts, contemporary literature, theater. People used to yell at me for not having enough classes in my major, but I didn't intend to live in my major. I just lived in the world, and I wanted to know just about everything, which I never succeeded in doing, of course. But I did choose in college one person who was one of the most influential teachers I've ever had, and that's Lynn Loomis, who was a professor of mathematics. And he was the section person in my freshman year. Fell in love with his teaching. I don't think I've ever had a long conversation with him on a personal level, but I just loved his teaching. I am and have always been in love with good teaching. And so I followed him the second year, and I followed him for my third year, and I followed him into advanced mathematics, at which point I would have to put in much more time than I had. But I figured out what was so magical about the guy was, one, he projected joy in what he was teaching. He absolutely loved it. Second thing was that he assumed that if you were a sophisticated thinker, he would start each class laying down axioms, giving you the vocabulary, and he would not assume that you had any particular knowledge already. He assumed that if you followed the class, if you kept up, if you raised interesting questions, you could master higher mathematics. And I can't say that I mastered it, but my entire life, the amount of mathematical thinking and creative mathematics that has played a role in things I've done over the years came directly from my encounter with him. And he was totally pleasant. Once he ran into me and said, "I really think you should drop philosophy and major in math." And I said, "No, thanks. But thank you." I mean, I was lucky enough to have understood how to build knowledge on the basis of what the student brought to the class, but without having to depend too much on specific facts, information, or content. That's the job of the teacher, to fill up the cup, you might say, to get someone, first of all, ready to exercise their mind in a sophisticated manner, and then but you can't just exercise your mind the way you can run around and exercise your body. You have to have something to exercise it on. And for me, at one point in my life, I was exercising my brains through the sophisticated, complex mathematical proofs, theorems, derivations. The whole of his teaching was, I remember one final exam when I couldn't prove something that I was supposed to, and I was terrified of failing. And, they put the fear of failure into you, especially at Harvard when I was there. And he looked at my attempt at proving something, and he said, "This is extremely interesting attempt, so I'll give you an A- instead of an A." but your attempt is interesting because, and I learned from that, again, the idea that you want to find out what your student is thinking so that their error is not, quote, an error. Their error is a pathway to discovery that just happened to hit a blank wall. Happens to all of us. It happens to every creative thinker. Every writer has a dry time when they just want to tear up the blank page. Every mathematician comes up with things that they take a wrong route to a proof. Every scientist, every poet. I learned from mathematics, basically, how to treat my writing, how to be able to tolerate going down the wrong road and then putting an unfinished piece of work in the drawer and eventually coming back to it. Some of my most creative writing was pulled out of the shards of things that I abandoned because couldn't pull them off at the time. I know I have 3/4 of a mystery novel because I got a little tired of writing education for a while and social and political books for a while. And I tried my hand at a mystery novel. Didn't work. Sitting over there on my desk. And someday I might get back to it. But if not, I learned so much from the attempt. And I've stolen parts of it because I described some schools and I described the Maqueta in East Harlem, and those were really well done. So I've used them somewhere else. So that's one person who was a great teacher of mine. And I would say most of all, he conveyed absolute joy in learning. And at a time when, in some ways, I was pretty confused about living amongst Protestants since I came from the Bronx, and I'd never really seen a live one until I went to Harvard. Or if I saw them, I wouldn't have recognized them. He was he looked like a Protestant aristocrat, absolutely effusing joy. And it was a very important human education for me as well as mathematical education. So that's one of the teachers that I have never been able to forget. Second teacher who has really influenced my life in a profound way was Miles Horton, one of the founders of the Highlander Center, which is now in New Market, Tennessee. It still exists, though. Miles passed away about 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. My God, just time it's ridiculous. Anyway, when you get older, everything seems to have gone by too fast as you age. And as you look forward, everything seems also that it's going to be too fast. And certainly my wife, who just passed away, we've been married for 53 years, and from after her death, it seems to me like a minute or two that we had together. Very hard to live with. Anyway, I'll go back to Miles, but I have a digression. Judy, my wife, taught me, she tamed the wildness of my Bronx self, but tamed it in such a creative, interesting, loving direction. You know, you grow up in the streets in the Bronx, you tend to look over your shoulder all the time. You don't particularly trust people. You trust relatives, but not all of them. You learn how to maneuver and manipulate in a complex, hostile and semi-violent world. And then going to Bronx Science, I was living in an extraordinarily competitive world, and going from science to Harvard, again, a competitive world. And Judy never really asked anything of me but love and companionship and friendship. More than that, she was more courageous and more radical than I was when it came to risking yourself and your life on the line. And that's why she and Miles Horton got along so well. If Judy saw something unjust, she would go out of her way to join with other people, or sometimes by herself, to take action to change it. She was so gentle and so tough at the same time. And it's very interesting because we wrote, our first book we wrote together, View from the Oak, was a book about ethology. It's about science and animal perception. Interesting thing that sorted itself out as we were writing the book is she was the scientist and I was the romantic. She tempered my romanticism, and I think I gave her the love that it took to take risks. She was willing to take risks, but we were both insecure in our own ways, and we became secure as a couple, which was very interesting. The course of my life, she's the only woman I've ever been able to actually go to bed with and fall asleep comfortably without getting ready to escape. I don't know. We were a complementary pair, and I think the reason that View from the Oak won the National Book Award was that it did balance a romantic attitude towards animal life with a strictly scientific appropriateness to the subject matter. And for both of our sakes, a thorough playfulness. She also was a marvelous teacher, and Jews from the Bronx, certainly my family, tend to be very impatient. You want to get stuff done. Let's get it taken care of. Let's do it and get to it. At least that's the way my family was. And Judy was more measured. She got to the same place I got to. Her route may have been circuitous. I usually failed, but if I try to go straight to the point, and I learned how to navigate from her, how to navigate people and the world and a movement and an idea. The idea being social and economic justice that both of us shared completely. It was wonderful. And Judy became a teacher. She tried to teach in the school I was teaching at in Harlem. Now, I was teaching that year she went in with a bunch of wild kids, but I loved wild kids. When you throw me into a group of wild kids, it's like throwing Brer Rabbit into the briar patch. I just kind of run through laughing all the way. That's my home turf. That's where I feel most comfortable. Well, I feel comfortable in a lot of different places, but I feel very comfortable with irregularity and with kids who creatively break the rules, or who break the rules against their own best interests, and helping to help them learn how to navigate the situation. Well, Judy tried to teach in my school, and she couldn't handle some of the third graders. They just were too wild for her. And she left. She quit and still had a passion to teach. And I said, well, why don't you tell me what kind of kids you'd like to teach. And she said, I want to teach kids with desperate need to touch reality and learn. And she got a job teaching at the Manhattan School for the Severely Disturbed and was an absolutely superb teacher of autistic and schizophrenic and seriously disturbed kids. She had the patience to educate them and to love them for who they were, not for what she wanted them to be. And she found her métier there. I tried that at the Reese School before I went into public teaching. I couldn't stand it. I got impatient with the kids. I learned a lot from the kids, but I didn't feel I taught them well. And I didn't want to. I wanted to go into the public schools where I felt comfortable. It was my turf. Having gone to the world's worst junior high, perhaps, and through the elementary schools. I went through the whole New York City public school system until I went to college. Anyway, Judy was also the most wonderful mother. You can ask our kids. She helped raise, she was central in giving them such a wonderful sense of decency, kindness, militancy. I think I contributed some of that, but it certainly was her spirit that infused our family and her creativity, her artistic growth. So I would say Judy, for 53 years, was a continual teacher of mine, and I miss her, of course. The third teacher who I mentioned before was Miles Horton, who had the same kind of spirit as Judy did, and the same kind of toughness and capacity to be defiant in the cause of justice that I did, and in a different mode she did. Miles was one of the founders of the Highlander Center in Tennessee, and started out with a group of people who, they started out in 1932, which was in the middle of, or the beginning of, well, right in the middle of the Depression. And their goal was to nothing short of eliminate poverty in the United States. Except the way they would do it, and the way Highlander went about it, is they were not an organizing center. One of Miles's friends, Saul Alinsky, was an organizer, brought people together, organized them into groups of defiance and advocacy and all. Miles's idea was that poor people have the capacity to solve their own problems if given an opportunity, and that the goal of an educator is to bring together people with the same problems and help them through conversations with each other, through questioning, through raising possibilities, through speculation, create solutions that they were willing to act on for problems that they couldn't currently solve. Rosa Parks was at a Highlander seminar, and the role of that seminar was the desegregation of the South. This was in the 50s, before the Montgomery bus boycott. She was at some Highlander Senate and said she was going to act, and she was going to do something in Montgomery, where she came from. She was, by the way, just as an aside, Rosa was, I had the privilege of meeting her at Highlander once. She was a community leader, a union steward, one of the heads of the NAACP, and a very respectable churchwoman. She was not a poor tired woman. In fact, when I asked her, how do you respond to that? She says, yeah, I was tired. I was sick and tired of racism all my life. Not more at that moment than any other time in my life. She was an activist who, because she was arrested, everybody in Montgomery who had prepared for the boycott was ready to act, because there was nothing they could do to Rosa that would make her yield to the police or the authority except complete desegregation. So that's why the boycott depended so much on her. King came along later. I told that whole story of what actually happened in the Montgomery boycott in one of my books that New Press published. I learned the story from the people who made the history at Highlander, and I was very fortunate that they were willing to use me as a vehicle to tell the story. Highlander helped organize SNCC. Miles never did direct teaching. He figured out what a problem was, went to find leaders from the communities who were thinking about doing something to make change, and who, when they decided and when they used the skills and knowledge they already had, not the knowledge from outside experts, not the knowledge from psychologists, not the knowledge of sociologists, the knowledge they've had by being alive and aware, and the increased awareness that they developed through other people and some of the people at Highlander, like Miles and Helen Lewis and Mike Clark, superb teachers in the sense of superb at getting opening communication among the poor and with the poor, among the struggling and with the struggling, and getting them to take control of the solution of their own problems. Miles did this with people in South Africa, with the Maori in New Zealand, all over the world. Anyway, Miles taught me how to communicate with people with great big goals in mind and let them work step by step towards those goals. One of the Highlander seminars that I was most impressed with is the role of the beautician in the coming struggle in the South. In other words, these people knew they were going to create a civil rights movement. These were people in the South. These were not this was before SNCC and before Kohl and before the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This was during the time they did voter registration through Highlanders, teaching people how to master the documents that would empower their lives. And the beauticians were chosen, and this is where the analysis of the community becomes central. They were chosen because they were independent of the white community, were their own business people, were a center for gossip and meeting, and a center of communication in the black community, free of the white oppressors. So it was a perfect place to organize. And Septima Clark, who Bernice Robinson was the first teacher there, and Septima Clark was the education director of Highlander, who was really what a lot of people say now is the grandmother of the civil rights movement. It's a picture of her and Miles and myself on the wall back in my study here. Anyway, Miles gave me hope when, after 25 years of struggle, things seemed impossible. he not only gave me hope, but the idea of Highlander gave me hope. And what I tried to do when we left Berkeley was create a Highlander over here, and on a much more modest level, we've been very effective. And then Miles asked Judy and me to write his autobiography, and a book that we are both extraordinarily proud of. It's called The Long Haul, and it won the Robert Kennedy Book Award, but that's not the point. Its audience is the very people who would be organizing. It's not a specialty book or a subject matter book. It's a story of struggle through the eyes of Miles Horton and his life in his own voice. Anyway, Miles totally inspired not just me, but my daughter Erica, who was deeply educated through Highlander and Miles, and Judy and myself. And he's fortunately spent a lot of time with us. And after 8 years of working together and putting the book together, we desperately didn't want to finish it. We wanted to stay with him and hear the 50th version of the same story that he told, because each time he told a story, he told it in a context to an audience and changed it any way he thought would be good for the education of the people. He was not a historian. He was a storyteller of a traditional sort. Anyway, those were three people who have played a very important role in how I've shaped and lived my life.